Hello and welcome to this NDTV special. We are live with Mr. K.V. Subramanian, who is the government's chief economic advisor, on the day when the economic survey has finally come out. The first economic survey of the Modi government 2.0. And the economic survey very quickly is important because it sets out a blueprint for the economy going forward and also gives you a snapshot of where we are as of now, a day before the budget. Mr. Subramanian, thank you very much indeed for joining us at the end of a day of many interviews, but you still are smiling and cheerful, which is always a good sign. Congratulations.
Thank you very much
for getting that off your chest. I'm sure you must have been pretty stressed for the past several days.
I tend to not get stressed about
you tend to not get stressed. Okay. Okay, look, let's just jump in, but let's just look a little bit at the big picture first, because going through the survey, I was a little confused as to how you are actually seeing the arc of the economy, because you start off by saying that the stage is set for India to actually leap forward when it comes to growth, that India needs to be growing. It is growing right now at about 7%. That's the figure you projected.
We need to grow at 8%.
You need to grow at 8% to hit that Prime Minister's target of a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25, which is in about 5 years' time. But at the same time, you also outline that the economy is facing serious challenges and the graph can go the other way. So which is it?
So what we've tried to do is to focus on what we need to do, which is the strategic blueprint to really achieve that vision of that $5 trillion economy. And which then translate, as I just said, and put 8% growth rate.
Sure.
But in particular, what we are trying to do is to signal a change in the way we think about development and economy, in our country.
Yes.
We've done two things generally. One, we view jobs, demand, exports, etc. in silos, trying to solve separate problems.
Sure.
When they actually are, they are sort of complementary to each other. Think about your left shoe and your right shoe, they're complementary to each other. One without the other doesn't work. Similarly, we've gathered careful evidence from China and other East Asian economies that grew very high at high rates.
How we can actually end up like them.
To show that we actually, if you have to pursue a path of growth, of economic growth, then it is investment driven economic growth that all these countries pursued when they were at a stage that we are, some years back.
Okay, so while you say that,
let me finish that point actually, is the other key, which is, so rather than looking at these in silos, we actually are viewing it together. Second part is that, one of the ways in which we are departing is that rather than thinking about the economy being in equilibrium, which is what most economists really, sort of use as a metaphor. And for the benefit of viewers, equilibrium is you have a glass bowl, you put a marble on it, the marble basically slides and goes down and rests there. That's equilibrium. But economies actually do not sit there. They actually, they are either in a virtuous cycle or in a vicious cycle. And that's an important change in the mindset in which we view economies that has to be done.
Okay, so you're claiming that you're arguing that we should actually be in a virtuous cycle and not a vicious cycle. But let me ask you, let me now ask you a few, I don't know if the right word is contradictions, but a few questions that come up based on your survey itself. Number one, while you talk about the fact that if we take these steps, we can get there, the question is, are we in a position to do that? Because as you outline yourself, in your outlook in chapter 2, you say there are a number of reasons why growth may not actually be increasing, going up. You say there are apprehensions of slowing growth, which will have implications for revenue collections. 2, you say the financial year 2018-19 has ended with a shortfall in GST collections. 3, you say resources for the now expanded PM Kisan scheme and the Ayushman Bharat, which is the healthcare scheme, as well as new initiatives are putting pressure on the fiscal deficit. 4th, you say US sanctions on oil import from Iran is likely to have impact on oil prices.
Let's move on.
Well, our viewers need to know. And 5th, you say the 15th Finance Commission will submit its report, which will also have an impact on government's finances.
Correct.
So
the important thing to remember, to understand here, is that the growth slowdown itself has been because of an overhang from the era before 2014, because we ended up actually having a problem on both our balance sheets, the corporate balance sheet and the bank balance sheets. Moreover, the quality of investment itself was so poor, which is what led to the to the slowdown in investment. And the slowdown in investment, and recognize that for the benefit of our viewers, you invest today, the impact of that and growth happens with a lag.
Right.
So it's the overhang that was created, which is why the slowdown in investment happened, and that has indeed then affected
investment. That sounds almost like a political point, by the way, when you're saying that there's a
that's
kind
an
of
economist's point. This is an economist's stake. Actually,
Okay.
I am holding an independent office, and I'm giving you an independent view, which I've written about it even when I was outside office. I've made the same point before as well.
Okay.
About let me finish this point, because it's an important point.
But I want to ask
let me finish this, Vikram, first. This is important because and we warned about it as well in the survey, that we do not want to follow that same path where we went about the quantity of investment without worrying about the quality of investment.
Okay.
So what we're trying to lay out is, yes, we do recognize there's been some slowdown, but we can get to that 8% path. How do we get to that 8% path? We get to that by basically getting on this virtuous cycle with investment, especially private sector investment.
Okay, fine. So let's come now to your point about what is broadly seen as the East Asian model of how India can revive itself, which is that you increase,
and the Chinese model as well.
And the Chinese, you increase savings, you increase investment, you become an export-driven economy as opposed to a consumption-driven economy. You say this is a break from the past, but some would argue that this is basically, in a way, repeating mantras that we've now heard for years, in survey after survey, in policy after policy.
But not implemented.
But not implemented. Okay, so how? Because then the question arises, how? Because when you talk of investments as driving growth, and you're particularly talking of private sector investment, your own data, and I have a chart here with me, actually shows that investment has been falling. Right? It's been systematically falling. I'll try and get the camera to zoom in just for the benefit of our viewers. You're aware of these figures.
Yes, of course.
But this is investment rate measured as a percentage of GDP, and both sector-wise fixed investment rate.
On that.
Both are falling. So in simple terms, how do you actually think, if you were to outline 3 steps, how do you actually think the private sector, because you want the private sector to invest more,
correct,
how will they do it?
So number one, I think, let me clarify on savings.
Yes.
Aggregate savings has been falling,
yes,
but savings has both the financial savings, which is what we invest in banks, mutual funds, etc.
Right.
But you also have the assets that households create. The decrease has been in the assets that households create because there's actually been a greater emphasis on consumption.
Right.
So the financial savings have not decreased, and that is important to recognize here.
Okay. On the investments,
and a key role, again, when you look at the other countries, demographics has played an important role in these savings.
Okay.
Because one, as lifespans expanded, in order to save for retirement, especially in those in the cohort of 40 plus, up to 60, they actually end up saving more.
Yes.
And this gets particularly pushed further when the dependency ratios, which are basically the number of children that you have, which you can depend on for your old age, when those decrease, then you rather save it yourself than depend on for. And this is something which is already also happening in India.
Okay.
So
that's on savings. On investment, though.
Yes.
Give me 3 steps as to how you think the current trend of investments falling, how is that going to be reversed?
So first, what we have to recognize is that globally, if you look at the liquidity conditions and the interest rate environments, they're extremely benign, possibly a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity.
Okay.
So there's a lot of flush liquidity that is floating around, looking for opportunities of investment in an economy that can grow at high growth rates. Number one. So there is basically the supply there.
Okay.
And there is,
it's not, so far they've not shown any great interest.
No, that is what, so the job of the survey is to lay out these and think about what are the steps that we need to do.
So number one, you're saying global liquidity.
So we should be tapping into that by enabling some of the foreign savings to come in, because that is really important for us to trigger this virtuous cycle.
Okay, that's number one.
And then once you trigger the virtuous cycle, then the beauty here is that because of investment that enhances productivity, that productive firms are the ones that can go and compete in international markets and exports. So jobs get created. Let me finish this point, right? So jobs get created, which is what then leads to purchasing power, and thereby this virtuous cycle. So to trigger it, foreign savings will have to tap into.
That's number one.
Number two, we've talked about the cost of capital, which is something which is really important, because investment depends. If your cost of capital is high, then you actually will be balking a little bit at investing. Here, the enactment of the bankruptcy code is an important step. Why? because it is bringing about behavioral change, especially in the way firms do their capital budgeting. Because when we talk to banks, for instance, earlier if I was a firm, I could actually put some numbers in an Excel worksheet,
yes,
and then I would actually go and do the investment because I could manage the system any way which I wanted if the things did not work out. In contrast, let me finish. In contrast, you know, now when we actually, let me make the point that capital budgeting now, on the other hand, promoters have to worry about the fact that if the project does not do very well, they'll have to go into, you know, IBC and lose their company.
So while I think you're certainly right to the extent that the IBC, the Insolvency and Banking Code, has brought in a great amount of accountability.
Yes.
How is that going to? But how is that going to drive investment?
That is
that going to get the private sector to invest more?
Vikram, if you allow me to finish this point, I'll explain.
I'm Srinivasan, but that doesn't matter.
That's fine. So, you know, if you allow me to explain, what I'm saying is, cost of capital, as I was explaining, is important for investment. Cost of capital itself is the combination of the risk-free rate, which is what the Government of India securities have, and what is called the credit spread.
Right.
The credit spread depends on how likely are you to repay the loan or not, which is what the bank anticipates. Because of the IBC, as I was just mentioning, banks now are factoring in that the likelihood of the loan getting repaid is much higher. As a result, they can charge a lower credit spread, which will, you know, bring about the reduction in the cost of capital.
But despite that, the fact is that that non-performing assets, while marginally coming down, are still extremely high. Right, the total figure is somewhere in the range of 9 to 10 lakh crores.
Yeah, because, you know, but the cleanup, 3 lakh crores have actually been cleaned up through the IBC.
Okay.
Now remember, you know, when the Augean stable was built over 8 years, you can't clean it up in a few years. It actually takes time for it to get cleaned up. So this is something, it's happening. It will, you know, it's running its course. The NPAs have bottomed out, and now they are definitely looking up. Together with that, I think the capital...
I want to ask you though about, because you seem to suggest that all of this has happened in the past 5 years as a means of actually setting the stage for a bigger leap forward.
Yeah.
While there's one view that the past 5 years was actually somewhat of a lost opportunity. And let me actually quote to you from your own predecessor's economic survey starting from 2014-15, when Arvind Subramanian wrote, India has reached a sweet spot, rare in the history of nations, in which it could finally be launched on a double-digit medium-term growth trajectory. 2015-16, sweet spot still beckoningly there. 2016-17, anxieties about foregoing sweet spot opportunities must be dispelled. 2017-18, no mention of sweet spot.
No, I think these are, what you've pulled out is something that I'm not going to dispute. What we are trying to do, what to say here is that this government has come back with a, you know, unprecedented mandate. We want to lay out a blueprint. The Prime Minister has already articulated a vision for us to become a $5 trillion economy. We have an opportunity now. We need to grab that opportunity. And I think that is something that we have to recognize. The only way we can do this is by setting out on an investment path. We've talked about it, but we've not done it yet. I don't, and also let me make it very clear, I do not think that we've spoken about it with as much clarity about this is the only thing, you know, let's just focus on private investment. Earlier we've talked about, okay, let's do, you know, X, let's do Y, jobs, is that.
Really?
Here we're talking about.
Would you argue that? I mean, try to encourage private investment has been something that governments have been struggling to do for years.
I agree with that. That I'm not, you know, and that I'm not denying. What I'm saying here is that the fact that economy is a virtuous cycle, the complementarity is here, and therefore only the investment as the key driver, let that happen, the other things will automatically happen, is the point that we are, the break that we make.
Mr. Subramanian, the question though is that you're saying that you want to achieve all this without worsening the fiscal deficit. You want to encourage the private sector to invest, you don't want to get into too much public sector spending, exactly. But if you look at the government's own spending plans, if you look at how much is being set aside for PM Kisan, for Ayushman Bharat, for Swachh Bharat, Narega expenditures going up, how is this? So how is this going to work? That is going to upset the.
We are going to be. I think, you know, what you're bringing out is actually, these are important considerations. One of the key things that, you know, we need to keep in mind is the contribution from non-tax revenue. As the GST is stabilizing, there is actually, you know, undeniably there's been volatility in it,
and the numbers haven't matched up.
I've actually, you know, I think but non-tax revenue, the opportunity that exists there Together with asset monetization, a lot of our PSUs sit on huge land banks, and there is enough opportunity there to be able to bring those together and monetize it. These are ways of building non-tax revenue which can complement. Finally, rupee is a rupee, and whether we get it from the taxes or we get it from the non-tax sources, it doesn't matter. So the budget math will actually work out, because rather than while we wait for the stabilization on the taxation part, we can work on some of the other opportunities that are there to ensure that we stick to the glide path. And final point, because private investment is something, and we are conscious that if we do not follow the fiscal the path, then there may be a crowding out of private investment. So it's important for us to pursue that. The final point being, as I mentioned already, which is the liquidity that is there globally, is something that we can utilize even for the sovereign. Because the cost of borrowing, if you look at our fiscal deficit, large proportion of a primary deficit is almost zero. It's the interest payments that make a big difference, right?
So if you reduce the cost of that to try to service our debt. Last question I want to ask you is about jobs, because when you talked about trying to grow at 8%, for the Aam Aadmi and Aam Aurat who are watching, these are in a sense abstract numbers, right? What they are feeling are what the farmers feel is rural distress. What a lot of particularly the youth feel are jobs.
Correct.
And we know that unemployment is a problem. So how do you, because I read the survey and
did you read the third chapter?
I read the chapter, I read the section on employment.
There is a chapter actually in volume 1 on MSMEs.
Okay, on small and medium industry.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you about that,
and that is the most important part to actually think about the question that you're asking me here.
Again, with all respect, trying to get to galvanize our small and medium businesses is something that many governments have tried to do in the past. This government has also had 5 years to do it. It's not really worked out to the extent that it should. So again,
let me actually, I think,
what is the one or two mantras that you think is going to be different this time?
Let me articulate that. See, over 7 decades, we've actually followed the following policy. Let me give you a simple example. Let me take a dwarf tree, and let's take a giant tree. A giant tree gives you shade and gives you fruits. And when it was actually a small sapling, we had to nourish it. But once it becomes a giant tree, we don't have to nourish it either with resources which are finite in nature and in the economy. In contrast, your dwarf tree neither gives you shade nor gives you fruits, and actually keeps consuming resources. Through our policies, and what we have done is, and we show in this chapter that 85% of our firms, by number, have less than 99 employees, and their contribution to jobs is less than 25%. Their contribution to productivity is less than 15%.
So if you do,
I'm coming to that.
How do we fix that? Because I know you're coming to labor reform.
No.
Okay.
Actually, that is this chapter. The second part of the chapter is precisely about how do you fix it. And let me give you one more example. Why has this happened? The 7 decades of policies that have led to this predicament, which is, let's think about your son or daughter might have learned to ride a bicycle. When he was doing that, you may have given him support wheels so that he or she does not fall down. And but at maybe within a couple of weeks or so, you would have taken those support wheels off. But if you told the kid, let's say that you're going to have these support wheels all the time, the incentive for the kid to actually become an independent biker may not have been there. This is what we've done with this is what.
So this is the metaphor. Now the reason why I'm rushing you is because your minders are going to tell me I've run out of time. So give me a solution there.
Srinivasan, let me finish that. Right? Because I use the metaphor to convey the thought that we've similarly promoted dwarfs because our incentives are size based. If I basically say that if your firm grows, becomes more than 100 employees, the benefits that you're getting you will not get it. It's a perverse incentive for firms to stay small.
But unfortunately, this is the kind of basic labor reforms 101 which has not happened.
No, this is not about labor. This is not about labor reforms. Is one part, and we are showing that as well. But we have size-based incentives across the board, whether it's for procurement, whether it's actually where everything is about a size-based threshold. So what we are suggesting is specific policy suggestions that we are making is, number one, with adequate grandfathering, let's have a sunset clause which says that any incentive that is given, size-based incentive is given, it will be withdrawn after 10 years.
After a certain point.
What are you telling here? Like your kid, you're saying that, hey kid, learn to grow up. Right? And that is the most important part. Number 2, focus on infant firms rather than on dwarfs, because it's the infant firms that actually grow up to become large trees and large firms, and thereby create employment because they exploit economies of scale.
Mr. Subramanian, I have to ask you though this, when you talk of MSMEs, that one of the the big, I wouldn't say a death blow is perhaps too strong, but certainly a very, very strong blow to MSMEs was demonetization.
So, see, what I am trying to focus on here are the set of policies that we followed over the last 7 decades. The job of the survey is to point out some intrinsic, not just look ahead, but learn from history, something that we've been, messing it up for the last 7 decades. Here what we are saying, trying to provide a mindset change. And we've, if you go and look at one of the graphs that we show is, in other countries, for instance, firms as they age, they produce lots of jobs.
Right.
Our fascination with these dwarf firms, as a result, we are neither productive nor are we creating enough jobs.
Okay.
So the key point here is to basically develop that paternalistic instinct to let these firms grow and to be able to compete on their own. That is what is really critical.
I have to ask you before we go, one particular sidelight of the survey, which has certainly excited Twitter, which is where you suggested incentives for people who pay high taxes. Different kinds of incentives, and one of those incentives you suggested is that they should be given some kind of VIP treatment when they're going through airports and whatnot, and perhaps even naming airports and monuments after them.
So
was that tongue in cheek or you serious?
No, I was absolutely serious about it.
Okay.
It's a recognition. Even in the interim budget speech, the finance minister had mentioned that those who pay taxes indeed contribute to the economy. The taxes that you pay actually are contribute to the economy. So you should be recognized for the taxes you pay.
But I think expecting an airport to be named after me may be a bit much. So.
But that's because maybe you don't contribute enough. Maybe you should think about asking for a much higher salary increase. In which case, I will suggest that airport be developed on your name as well. But the point being here that it's a tax rupees that eventually contribute to whether it's welfare schemes, and so we need to really. It's about recognizing people who contribute to the nation. Those who contribute with their tax. Without that money doesn't grow on trees. Without the taxpayers' money, none of the schemes can be run. So why not recognize those? What's wrong about it? Which is,
interesting idea. Let's see if there are any takers. But thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and we wish you all the best on your plans for the economy. Thanks very much.